Welcome to the Infinite Surface podcast. Today we have a short episode with Thai-American artist Bang Puangpakdee. I've known of Bang's works, especially his drawings, for a long time, since we're both alumni of the School of Visual Arts, and we're both former students of the school's longtime and well-loved drawing instructor, John Ruggieri. Today we talk about Bang's approach to drawing, how he designs his compositions, how he thinks about line work, contour, and the role that drawing from observation plays in creating the sensitive and well-observed drawings that he makes. Without further ado, episode 7 of the Infinite Surface podcast.
Hey, what's up? My name is Bang Puangpakdee. I was born in Thailand and currently living in Queens, New York.
Great. And Bang, thanks for coming on to talk to us about drawing today. Big fan of your drawing. And can you tell us a little bit about, if I'm not mistaken, you draw on location a lot. Is that right?
Yes, I draw on location a lot. I started in 1999, so it's been a long journey.
And how did you start? How were you introduced to drawing on location specifically?
I was introduced, I was looking through, what SVA had to offer in terms of drawing classes. And I saw this thing that says location drawing. And it was like designed for like a graphic approach to drawing, from what I remember the description be saying. And I was like, yeah, let me just register for this class. At least I can be outside, and it sounded like a really cool class. So that's how I got introduced to it.
And so SVA is the School of Visual Arts, right?
Yes, the School of Visual Arts. Yeah, in New York.
Were you doing any drawing from observation before that on your own?
I was not. I was not at all. I was, I wasn't even a passionate artist, quite honestly.
Really?
I was like, art is something I did as a kid, like always. But once I got to junior high school, I didn't even apply myself. My drawing teachers would be like, hey, do you ever apply yourself? And I would enter competitions. I might win some things here and there, but I wasn't like really ingrained into like a daily practice, or did I feel like passionate about making art. It was just like, hey, I'll just do this.
Right. Interesting. And did that change when you were introduced to drawing on location?
Yeah, that changed. That, like, when I first got in that class, and the professor John Ruggieri, once he made that first shape, and I was like, my mind just like went like, whoa, wow, what is this? Because what I was used to was just seeing perfectly rendered drawings, right? That's growing up, like, hey, it has to be beautiful, it has to be like perfect. And then once I saw him breaking it down to just geometric shapes, I was like, whoa, and as a graphic design student at that time, that was like my freshman year. Yeah, my freshman year at SVA. And I was like, whoa, just changed my whole perception of what drawing was or is. And definitely struck a major chord with me, and that's why I still do it.
And is it a daily practice for you, or like just as much as you can, or how does it work into your weekly schedule?
It wasn't. It used to be, like when I'm on vacation, kind of thing. Like, hey, I'm on vacation, I have free time, I can go do this. When I was in school, obviously it was like a weekly practice. It was like, hey, okay, go draw. And then, I worked 16 years as a graphic designer in different kind of like sector of creative, So I never got to do it as much, but it was like 2016 was when I decided. I was like, hey, look, this is something that really connects to who you are, and really something that I enjoy and I want to develop. So I just stopped doing commercial work for the most part. If it didn't involve drawing or illustration, I wouldn't take on the project. I didn't want to solve a problem in the sense of like, graphic communication. I just wanted to solve this problem in terms of how do I arrange this composition and how do
Right.
I yeah, and I just went through that, and then that in 2016, that became a daily ritual. I would draw from the morning to the night, however
Mm.
many drawings I could get in on location, and yeah.
And so when you're drawing on location, like what's that like for you? What are you looking at? What are you seeing? I mean, what's the vibe like that for you?
It's usually a long walk, unless I have a specific destination I'm going
Mm.
to. Is I usually just carry my board. It started that way. Carry my board, my pencil, possibly a needed eraser, and I would just walk around, just looking at architecture, looking at negative space, um, because I couldn't draw people very well at all at the beginning. So I would just look at
Mm.
buildings. I'm like, okay, cool. They don't move, and it's less intimidating, without people being in the scene. So yeah, and I would find some kind of composition is usually like, you know, how we think is like where geometric meets organic form. I look for
Mm.
that form in the real world, and then I'm like, okay, this looks interesting. This is cool. Can I? And then I just find a departure point. Like, okay, I'm going to start here. I'm going to use this object or this building to anchor me, and then I'll use that anchor as the measuring point for everything else in the drawing, and I just build out. And
Mm.
then and then use the theory of selectivity, like, okay, do I need this information in here? Is it going to clash with all this information I have here? So it's like finding a balance in the composition.
Yeah, yeah. And how do you normally, if you're looking at something very complicated, how do you normally navigate your way through that? Because what strikes me about a lot of your drawings is, as you say, some areas are just really big, vast geometric shapes, and then some areas seem to really become dense and dialed in and quite textured. So how do you navigate that? Like, how do you think about that while you're drawing?
I think it's also like my own personal mental focus as I'm going through the process. Like, okay, it's time to zoom in. It's time. I want to get this detail, or there's something here in this architecture that I really like that I want to capture. And then once you're in that capture zone, and like certain areas will just be like, oh, let me zone in, and then I can make broader strokes, and then use the principle of opposition, like, okay, dense, not dense,
Mm.
you know, like little shape, bigger shape, um, yeah, and then how they juxtapose each other. And
Do you feel like you learn to see differently since you've been drawing this much? Is that something that you can put into words, or is that
yeah, totally.
completely?
I definitely see the world differently. I see perspective differently. Yeah, you just look at the world a lot different. Look at you. I look at a lot more negative shapes now, negative
Mm.
space.
Mm.
Empty space. Because the tendency is like, I know when I first started, the tendency was just to really just to fill the page, right? It's
Mm.
like, oh, I got to fill every corner of this page, and as I progressed through this art form and having great mentorship, I began to learn to see the world differently. Hey, not you don't have to fill in this whole thing. You don't have to
Mm.
give them the whole story. It's like, and I think that's what, based on people that speak to me about my work, that's what gravitates them to the work, because they get to
Mm.
fill in the blank. It's not
Mm.
like, hey, this is exactly what it is. It's like you kind of have room for some interpretation.
Right, right. And do you end up, while you're drawing on location, do you end up interacting quite a bit with people around, or is it a quite solitary thing?
Yeah, I actually always never failed. I'll have some kind of interaction with some people, and the funny thing is that this art form, part of it was to be in solitary. This is my time. This is like me trying to escape
Mm.
everything and everyone, but then I just end up, it's like brings me to the source, and I'm there, and I'm like, okay, this person wants to talk to me, and I keep that always in mind when I'm creating art in public, that like, hey, this is something that's really true and pure to your heart, and like you have to operate like that and be that as a person too. You have to be pure and true I made time for people, and sometimes I'm in the zone where they know, like, hey, this guy, no one's, you can't talk to me right now,
You have a particular face for
Yeah,
that.
it's just, my face will be all like, all of these weird shapes because you're trying to like really, see what it is, right? And that's the
Yeah,
hard part. It's like really
yeah,
not making things up is more difficult than you think, when you're
yeah,
drawing.
yeah,
You think you're like, oh, this is it's a circular head, it's a circular face, or it's like it's
yeah,
really not. It's like it's an angular shape. It's and
yeah,
really just taking the time to really just see things for what they are, and accepting the things as they
yeah.
are.
And when you're drawing, like maybe this is a quite technical question, but one of the things that always really strikes me beyond a little bit beyond the what you mentioned people often respond to, which is like the filling in the blanks, the big negative spaces and stuff like, which I love. But one of the things I really really love is your very sensitive line work, and I feel like I mean, the reason I asked you to have this conversation because I want to talk a little bit about like blind contour drawing, and I know you don't do exactly that, but it reminds me of that. It reminds me of this like kind of deep and penetrating looking, and I'm wondering how often when you're in those areas, like if you're finding a wrought iron fence or something like that, and that's the part that you want to bring some density to or some detail to, are you at your page drawing like this, or are you looking up here almost drawing like this? Like, do you trust your hand that much, or how do you go about that?
It's always a mixture. It's always a mixture. Sometimes I don't really do too much drawing without seeing, unless I'm like, okay, I know this line is going to go all the way to the bottom of the page.
Mm,
Then I can commit to that line. Like, okay, that column from that building in the foreground, I'll just draw that in real quick. And then that becomes like I was saying earlier, like that column becomes my ruler almost. And then
mm,
I can use that to work because I'm right-handed, so I work to the right side of the page. So I start on the left and I work to the right,
mm,
you know.
mm. Yeah.
So it's always constantly looking and measuring, like, okay, how long is that line coming down compared to that object in the background. So it's foreground, background, and measuring, and the line weight that comes into play when I'm
Mm,
trying to communicate the distance of the
mm,
object, and the substance of the object. So if
mm,
it's like a concrete beam, or a car or something heavier weight. If it's metal, then you can go more aggressive with the how heavy the line is, and
mm.
obviously the closer the object is, your line is going to be a lot denser and thicker, and that's
Right,
going to
right.
help create depth. And and then the faint lines in the back, you know the softness of a line on someone's face. You can learn that a
Mm,
lot about that, like even doing a self-portrait, like drawing your own face and just following the contours of the light, how light hits your face,
mm.
and that helps develop line sensitivity too.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, but most likely, more than likely, always looking. Yeah, just back and forth. But sometimes you're like, oh, you get in the zone. You can kind of, not have to look as much,
Mm,
but
mm, mm.
it's
Yeah,
always you making a conscious decision to slow down sometimes and just look, because you can get
right.
carried away, and then that's like, yeah, it's because there's a lot going on in location drawing. There's like people moving, there's cars, there's noise, and you're in a vulnerable space in some level, because you're
Right.
completely exposed, um and yeah.
Oh, I have one more question for you. So you mentioned before perspective drawing, and it seems to me like I'm making an assumption here, but it does you don't seem like the kind of guy who like sat down and mastered linear perspective, like in the rulers and pins on the wall and string kind of method.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
so what I'm wondering is like if you had some advice for either students or people that want to draw, because it can be so, as you say, intimidating to just approach like an on location thing and try to fill up a page. So how did you go about sort of figuring that out? Like, how did you get over the hump between like, lines just not adding up and shapes just not adding up? space just not making sense, and then all of a sudden being able to translate what you're seeing down here on the page without really getting into like drawing a vanishing point and running lines out from that.
Yeah. Actually, the whole drawing from vanishing point thing, I did that at an earlier age. I think that was what
Yeah.
I was taught when I was in Thailand. Like, I remember as a kid, like 6 years old, drawing these square boxes and, like you said, running those vanishing lines. But that was the most that I did with that.
Mm.
And, because, yeah, definitely this location drawing, this style, or how I was taught, we weren't really focusing on that at all, in terms of like, drawing these perspective lines. It was just kind of, everything you have, it's in your eyes. Like if you open your eyes and you just see and you just really understand, just even the principle of perspective, then you'll see the lines, and
Mm.
there's hundreds and thousands of perspective lines running through anything all in one time. But how I got used, yeah, it was just failing, like, oh yeah, this drawing, it didn't line up, okay, it's fine. And I think the whole insignificance of it is what gave me enough courage to kind of just go out there, because you weren't afraid to fail. And it was like, it doesn't have to turn out beautiful, it doesn't have to even turn out like a complete picture.
Mm.
It was just like going out there and giving it a shot, just trying and constantly failing. I mean, I have hundreds of drawings that like that just sit in a box, and I'm like, I look
Right.
back, I'm like, wow, and yeah, I mean, like, it just takes time, it takes development. But if you're like committed to wanting to improve your lines and be more confident, and it all shows in the work.
Mm.
If how confident you are as a person, or how fluent you are, and how you're feeling when you're creating the work, like, yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, Bang, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time, and those were some excellent, wise words for drawing advice. I really appreciate it.
No problem, Jesse.
All
Thanks for
right, thank
having
you, my
me.
friend. Sure thing.
Thank you. Coffin Cop.
Welcome, Cobb.